Everyone from my great pop to me has been in the timber industry in one way or another. From pine planting to harvesting to me in the factories dealing with the logs.
Tumut's a big timber area. We have about 4 mills and most of the community's employed some way or another through the timber industry, or their job relies on the timber industry.
The timber mill is important because it's the heart and soul of this town. There's people who plant the trees, people who cut down the trees, people who transport the trees, people who process the trees, people who buy the product from the trees, and people who build houses with it.
The timber mill that I work for has about 17 staff members, which is quite a significant workforce in that particular town and area.
Oberon is a fairly big timber town. Without the timber industry, Oberon probably wouldn't exist.
It's just a timber town and I went into the timber industry.
Virtually, been around timber all my life. Even my father, he worked in a pine forest.
My wife's a midwife at the hospital. I have 4 kids, 1 at high school, 1 in primary school and 2 at preschool.
We make a range of products. The bark from the trees goes into landscaping. We make sleepers for your garden, so you can have patios and retaining walls. And then of course we make timber for housing frames, trusses and building.
Our hardwood products goes to pallet maker material for carting materials such as steel and the likes across the country, even overseas. We also have fencing materials that we need to make for our farmers that have been devastated through bushfire impacts. We provide for the building industry as well, flooring materials, decking materials, which is crucial for the communities and the people that are building and expanding their homes.
Our factory primarily makes laminated board, it makes flooring, it makes your cornices for your house.
The major products we make are just your house frames and trusses. Frames are used for the actual walls and frames for the houses. Without the frames, you can't put a roof on.
Our customers are predominantly tradies, but we do have the retail side as well.
Bunnings is our biggest customer, and then other truss and frame places.
Our main markets is housing development, ranging from mid-North Coast to the New South Wales border.
The average day for me is putting on my uniform, my hard hat, my PPE, and then rotating through the mill. Manual handling a lot, operating machines and letting the flow of timber go throughout the process.
A day in the life of being a leading hand on that particular site is about organising your resources, looking after the guys, making sure they're doing their work safely. It's also making sure that we're cutting the right product and the quality of product as well that our customers expect from us.
I just build the house frames in various stages, from being on the bench to working out various machinery.
When I first moved to the Tumut area, I was not in a good shape and I didn't have a bank account. I didn't know how to drive a car. I'd never really had a proper job that was like paying tax. And then suddenly I applied for this job, and since then I've gone through the ranks and I've got a Cert 4 in training and assessing. I'm a first aider, I'm on the ECC and I'm a union delegate.
It's just a real nice community. Everyone bands together and chips in and helps one another out. And obviously, with the bushfires, that was pretty important.
When the bushfires hit, it was devastating. A lot of people lost their homes and having to rebuild.
My husband is a volunteer firefighter and our fire shed is about 1 kilometre away from our house. Fire was actually lapping at the fire brigade shed. When it got really close, we evacuated quickly.
We were affected. We had to leave a couple of times, which was very scary.
Got a phone call from some friends saying, your house is okay. So that was a relief.
The impact on the industry that we're in was being able to source the timber.
With the shortage that we now suffer, as well as the shortage we had before, at the Tumut mills that we send paper to, I know they were really affected. They've got to transport timber now from miles and miles and miles away.
The log supply at the mill has been cut dramatically since the bushfires.
We've had looked at other alternatives through private customers' properties, but also travelling further distances to get the material that we would normally get a lot closer to our site.
Since the bushfires, we've gone from a 2-shift operation to a 1-shift operation.
The supply we're getting is not as structural as it has been. So we can only use a lot of the timber in the frame side of it, not in the truss side of it. The supply issues affect us in a way that, you know, if we haven't got the supply here, we can't fulfil our contracts on time. We're the last people in the supply chain, and yeah, if we can't keep the builders and the housing companies happy, well, it's just our reputation that's on the line.
Are the people in my mill worried about their future? Yes, because literally we see an empty yard every now and again, or less logs in the yard, and that's what we'll be cutting and processing in the following weeks. So when there's not much there to look at, you realise that, well, it's going to be a bit of a downtime.
You know, we've obviously lost a lot in the fires. Seen that firsthand for myself, and to drive, you know, 10, 15 k's up the road to see, you know, bare earth now, it's a little bit hard to fathom, because it's obviously going to take a long time for that product to get back up around to that, you know, 20, 25 year growth period for a tree. So it's something that we've obviously got to look at.
The impact of the wind farms replacing plantations, the number one concern was, where else do we get the timber now?
The concern in the mill that people were going to take out trees that weren't ready to be harvested.
We didn't want to see the pine trees that were left be pulled up to put wind farms.
It's really important to have that land for pines. It takes 10 to 15 years for them to be mature enough to be used for anything.
To stop that plan, protest messages were sent out with the endorsement of the people from the floor. They signed a petition, and it was sent to the relevant politicians and authorities to show that we didn't want this to happen. It wasn't right and it wasn't economical.
I went around my work site and tried to get as many people as I could to sign the petition.
I was pretty proud to have the petition signed by 350 workers.
We got some pretty good outcomes from it. I believe we got double the amount of land for plantation purposes that they took for the wind farms.
There's been an inquiry in Parliament about the future of the timber industry. We've sent in petitions, spoken to politicians, and just explained how important it is to have timber in our area and to supply timber to build houses for people in Australia.
The submissions that we put in there to lobby the Parliament and the government to actually support the timber industry a little bit more than what they are, and it was just to get as many names across the board. And the more support we got from just the workers and other people, I got everyone in the factory here to sign it. That's the office staff and everyone, because it affects them as well. It doesn't only just affect the actual people building the frames or building the houses, it's a snowball effect.
They were really willing to show that they were standing behind us.
With the log of claims we've put forward, that was endorsed by over 500 members.
If we don't speak out, no one will listen or act.
Recently we presented our log of claims to a lot of politicians.
We're going to express our views and get a few of those key points across to make sure that the jobs are viable.
The next step, I guess, is to see who supports us and who doesn't.
We're calling on the government to expand timber plantations because we're looking into the future.
So that people like me can have a job for years to come.
12 months ago I had to lay off 3 or 4 people because we just didn't have the product.
The expansion of the timber plantations it's a no-brainer. The carbon factor for one.
I've planted 5th generation pines on the same block that my great-grandfather planted the first rotation.
We can sort of expand and move forward as a business and grow, especially in a small town.
The price of timber would hopefully be more reasonable.
We need action now for the future. Trees don't grow overnight.
Not exporting timber that can be processed in Australian mills will keep jobs local.
We're exporting timber and importing timber back to fulfil a supply issue that we've got.
We need those resources, especially under the current circumstances.
Manufacturing that goes overseas means that places in Australia either have to cut shifts or it potentially even shut down.
Once we've hired someone to do the work in Australia, we've finished the product, then send it overseas.
If we keep it in Australia, we can regulate it and keep it sustainable.
In some states, I believe that we've stopped the hardwood industry, or we've tried to restrict the hardwood industry, which has meant that we've brought in from overseas.
And there's no control on who does it, how it's done, economically, and so therefore it's really counterproductive to bring something in that really could be quite damaging for that particular area where it came from.
Down on the south coast, we cut hardwood timber. We do it efficiently, we do it effectively. We have a chance to make it work in an environmentally and sustainable way.
Calling on the government to assist in the cost of freight so that we can get enough timber into the town so that we can keep processing and keep our jobs.
We need schemes available to help transport timber. Everywhere they harvest, there's always leftovers. They've harvested it, they've forwarded it to the edge, they've stacked it up, and if it's not enough for a truckload, it's left, and it's really sad to see.
If we can't source it locally, we obviously need to look outside the box and have some sort of costs that can be refunded to bring the log back into the area.
Using New South Wales timber in New South Wales government projects will help secure jobs. They've got bigger purchasing power.
Buy Australian, buy New South Wales, keep the mill running.
Show that you support our industry and support our work.
Securing the timber industry is for all Australians.
You want your wood floors, you want your wooden kitchen benches. It's all part of our industry, and without us you wouldn't have it.
Everyone needs a roof over their house.
I think if the timber industry was to leave Tumut, there'd be some farmers here and some snowy workers and not too much else.
The timber industry supports a lot of families and people, and if it fails, well, we're just going to have to import timber, and that's going to put the price of housing through the roof again.
What I don't want to see in the community is less kids in the school and less subjects and having to send your kid to a boarding school, or less services at the hospital and having to go to Wagga for medical care.
In 30 years' time, when the trees are growing, there will be supply, but today we have problems of log supply.
To our politicians, there are solutions for these problems. We need to put them into action.